with Megyn Kelly.
Well, over the last week, we have seen federal officials facing a series of credibility questions that have a growing number of critics asking whether these folks are dishonest or incompetent. Take Iraq, for example. President Obama has argued for weeks that it wasn't his decision, we discussed this last night, to pull all of the troops out of that country.
What I just find interesting is the degree to which this issue keeps on coming up, as if this was my decision.
Now, the latest book by CIA Director and Defense Secretary Leon Panetta suggests exactly the opposite, that experts encouraged the White House to keep the troops there, fearing that Iraq would wind up in the hands of terrorists if we did not, a nightmare that indeed has come to fruition. Then there's Oklahoma. A recent convert to Islam beheads a woman on American soil after posting pictures of beheading and posting Islamic Jihad posters on his Facebook page. You can see he's fascinated by beheadings if you look at his profile online, even with Osama bin Laden and terrorism in general. Yet the White House, the administration, doesn't want to talk about it, and as of tonight, law enforcement tells us this is simply a case of workplace violence. While we're on the topic of threats, just over 2 weeks ago, President Obama assured us that Ebola was not an immediate threat to the homeland.
The chances of an Ebola outbreak here in the United States are extremely low. We've been taking the necessary precautions, including working with countries in West Africa to increase screening at airports so that someone with the virus doesn't get on a plane for the United States.
Somehow, Ebola patient Thomas Eric Duncan managed to do exactly that. He flew to the U.S. from Africa, potentially exposing dozens and perhaps more to this often deadly virus. And there is the issue of the president's own personal safety. Last month, a man with a knife managed to hop the White House fence. Not to worry, he didn't get far, or so we were told. As it turns out, in fact, he made it well into the White House. The Secret Service had initially downplayed the whole incident, but ultimately, the director was forced to resign this week. And that was right after the president expressed confidence in her. Then we learned that wasn't the only breach of the president's security. An armed contractor with a criminal record was also allowed on an elevator with President Obama last month at the CDC. The editor-in-chief of the Washington Free Beacon summing it all up this way, quote, "Over the last few years, the divergence between what the government promises and what it delivers, between what it says is happening or will happen and what actually is happening and does happen, between what it determines to be important and what the public wishes to be important, this gap has become abysmal, unavoidable, and inescapable." Joining me now, former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, who's the host of Huckabee right here on the Fox News Channel. I mean, it's a scathing indictment, and it does make you wonder whether we're entering a crisis of confidence here.
Well, I think we're not just entering it, we're in the middle of it. You know, my dad did not have much of an education, never graduated high school, but he taught me something, Megan. He said, if you tell the truth, you don't have to remember what you said the last time. This is a president that can't remember what he said the last time, and he tells a different story every time he tells it. What happens is you lose your credibility. And the one thing, I don't care whether you're a Democrat or Republican, the one thing you have to have is credibility, to stand before the American people and be believable. This president is no longer believable because time after time he says something, but it doesn't mean anything. And it's not good for the country. You don't forget about whether it's good for Republicans going into an election. This isn't good for America.
You know, Ebola and the Secret Service, I think you can arguably give them a pass on that, because you've got, you know, Ebola, he says, look, the chances of an outbreak here are extremely low. I mean, that was true, I suppose, when he said it, or at least you could make the argument that we've taken measures to be prepared. Okay, Secret Service, he had the confidence in them. It turned out not to be warranted. But the Iraq story, I mean, there is a strong argument that that is directly and intentionally misleading.
I think it didn't fit the narrative that he said we're going to get out of Iraq, we're going to get out of there completely. He didn't want to be there. But the book by Leon Panetta and that message...
Can't he just own that the way he did in the presidential debate with Mitt Romney, where he said we weren't going to keep 10,000 troops in Iraq and be bogged down, tied down in the Middle East. He laid it out in that debate with Romney, but he won't say it now that things have fallen apart.
That's the problem. Things have fallen apart, and he doesn't want to acknowledge that it was his decision, pulling out completely, not leaving a SOFA, a status support agreement, in place, that is largely responsible for the fact that this government could not contain itself, could not protect itself.
It's not okay. I mean, I tell you, Governor, it's bad enough to, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor,
Yeah.
right? That's people's health care. But we're now talking about national security and what actions create terrorist states and what actions don't. We need some straight talk on that and accountability, honesty.
Well, it goes to the difference between people will forgive a politician for saying something in a political campaign that's a stretch of the truth. Not that they should do it, but that's different. What we're talking about here is the issue of whether Americans live or die, not only in terms of what's happened in Iraq, but now with this Ebola patient coming saying, oh, it's so unlikely that it'll come. We know of the one case in Dallas. Let's pray to God that's all we have. But the likelihood, given the open sense that we have of letting people in, this isn't the only case we're going to see. That ought to scare the daylights out of everyone, from the president right down to the last kitchen table in America.
That was the follow-up, was that on Ebola. We have taken new measures so that we're prepared here at home. And then you hear about these 4 people staying in the apartment where the infected guy was throwing up for days. Nobody's moving. They're, the judge comes, gets them. I mean, they've got people delivering food. It's just, it doesn't seem like we're that prepared to handle.
How would you like to be an emergency room nurse somewhere in America and someone comes in and you really have to wonder if they've got fever and are throwing up, do they have the flu? Or where have they been and who have they been in contact with?
Right, because all we're relying on right now is their word when they leave those countries that they haven't been exposed. Governor, good to see you.
Thank you.
See you
Great
Sunday
to be
night.
with you.
Saturday night.
And Sunday.
Okay, we'll see you both.
We'll
start on Saturday, and then we'll
Gets
move on.
better Sunday night, yeah.
Up next, a big debate and more protests in Colorado over just how patriotic our history classes should be.